thank you so much for tuning in today. This is a continuation of NHAR's video series where we are interviewing some important voices around the state and the country who can provide great insight into the New Hampshire real estate market during these crazy times. So I want to say thank you so much and introduce our Congressman Pappas. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
It's great to be with you. I'm in my office in Washington. If you hear lots of buzzers going off, I'm not sure what they all mean yet, but it might mean that there's a vote happening, but I think we got enough time to get through a few questions here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking your time today. I truly appreciate that. So
Absolutely.
To start, as you know, the CARES Act extended unemployment benefits to the self-employed, which has proved an invaluable benefit to many realtors who faced a loss to their income. And on July 31st, the enhanced unemployment benefit, meaning that extra $600 per week, will end. As you know, many tenants and homeowners have also relied on those extra dollars in order to stay current on their rent or their mortgage. And I was wondering, do you think that that benefit should continue?
I think we do need to see some enhanced unemployment benefits going forward. This is a time of record unemployment and dislocation to our economy, into important industries like real estate. And so we've got to continue to throw people a lifeline so that they can weather this economic storm and we can get back up on our feet when this pandemic is over. Clearly, we took extraordinary efforts in Congress, including the enhanced unemployment, not knowing how long the duration of this pandemic would be. Now we have a clearer picture that it's going to be with us for some time. Just today, we saw a record number of infections because of COVID-19. We have some states that are becoming hotspots. Again, New Hampshire is trending in the right direction because of a lot of sacrifice and folks who are paying close attention to the public health messages. But it might not be that way in perpetuity. And we've got to be prepared for what might be ahead. For those folks who are out of work, or who are experiencing economic pain because of no fault of their own, I think there should be some enhanced federal unemployment benefits. We passed a bill to do that in the House called the HEROES Act that would extend those benefits through the end of the year. And we'll see, the Senate hasn't taken it up yet, but I think as we get closer to this July 31st deadline, I'm hoping that we can find a bipartisan way forward to provide some additional relief because it's needed.
Yeah, thank you. Two other programs which have proved helpful to many of our members are the Paycheck Protection Program, which has greatly helped myself, as well as the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. The deadline for those programs expired yesterday. I was curious, is there an effort to extend that deadline?
Yes, and I hope we can see it actually today, but stay tuned. I'm calling on the leadership to bring to the floor a bill that passed the Senate yesterday that would extend the deadline on Paycheck Protection Program loans. This would be for individuals, businesses that haven't yet been able to apply. It would extend the deadline out into August. I think that's prudent given what we're seeing right now. But I also support opening up a second round of Paycheck Protection Program loans because, as I said before, the economic pain we're experiencing is, I think, much more comprehensive and long-lasting than was initially anticipated. So we have seen tens of thousands of businesses and entities in New Hampshire secure PPP loans and the economic injury disaster loans. They've been an incredible tool, but I think we need to make sure there are additional tools on the table moving forward so that we can come out okay.
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of the Paycheck Protection Program, those loans are forgivable as long as the money is used for payroll, rent, mortgage interest, utilities. Congress did extend the length of time businesses could use that PPP from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, which was an important and welcome change for realtors. Just curious, are there any other changes or clarifications that you see coming along or that are being proposed currently?
Well, one of the other changes we made to the program that the president signed into law was how you could spend down the loan and what percentage needs to be devoted to payroll versus other expenses. So I'm glad that we were able to make that fix in addition to a longer time horizon for businesses from 8 to 24 weeks. But I do think we need a second round here, and it should be targeted to our small businesses, to entities that have been experiencing most of the loss and economic pain right now. I know that there are some sectors that are doing okay, maybe even doing well. There are others that are struggling, and they're going to be struggling for a while. And I would put real estate, our travel and tourism businesses, our hospitality businesses in that category. So I think they need to know that they can count on another round of support if they need to tap into that. So there's legislation to do that. And I'm hopeful that as we think about unemployment, as we think about support for our hospitals, for testing resources, that can all get rolled together in a package that we can consider this summer.
Yeah. As of today, in fact, Governor Sununu's moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent expires. Meanwhile, the FHFA has extended its foreclosure and eviction moratorium for single-family loans, which are backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, until August 31st. To protect borrowers and renters, my question would be, will Congress be taking any other actions to assist renters and landlords deal with this economic repercussions during this virus?
Well, we have to, because what we're seeing in New Hampshire is an estimated 10 to 20% of renters who haven't been able to pay their bills. We passed a piece of legislation recently in the House called the Emergency Housing Protections Relief Act, which looks to target support to renters and landlords who have been impacted. There's a $100 billion emergency assistance fund that's created under that legislation, and I think that's the right move. What we're afraid of at this point in time is a bubble of folks who might face eviction or foreclosure. That's not good for our economy. It's not good for those individuals who are impacted. And so this is an area where Congress needs to step up and provide some support. I hope that the bill that we pass will be considered by the Senate, or could potentially be a provision that's rolled into the next COVID relief package. What we've been hearing from the Senate is that there are increasing signs that there's an appetite for another round of relief. I think that's warranted, and housing needs to be one of the priorities in that bill.
Awesome, thank you. One of the governor's emergency orders here in New Hampshire, which has proven to be very helpful in the real estate industry, has to do with allowing remote notarization. I know there is an effort in Congress to expand access to remote online notarization with certain minimum standards, which is an effort we realtors feel is critical. Do you see this bill passing this year?
I'll have to take a look at that bill, but I think it's a good idea. And some of these, fixes that we see happening on a temporary basis in states across the country, or even some of the support we've given, say, to telehealth, I think are changes that we need to make permanent. Understanding that innovation is going to need to continue to take place. We're going to need to continue to adapt to the challenging environment. So this, I think, is a good idea, and I'll take a look at the bill, and hopefully we can, provide it with some support in the House.
I agree with you. I do think that this sudden requirement of shifting and making do with things and finding a new way to do some things, I've found a lot of value in that. I've seen great productivity, and I've seen it just make people's lives a little bit easier. So that has certainly helped out realtors, and if that could move forward, that would be huge for us. Yeah,
and I think it's all about modernizing and adapting, not just for the short term, but things that make sense to continue over the long term. And I think this is one of those. I know the bill has some good bipartisan support in the House, so we'll take a look at it, and happy to support it any way we can.
Wonderful, thank you. And as you know, this pandemic has exhausted town budgets and other municipal resources. We are concerned that those shortfalls could result in diminished services or perhaps higher property taxes. Are there efforts in Congress to provide financial support to state or local governments so that essential services can continue without adding costs to the property taxpayers?
I worry about this too. And when you talk to local officials, they're familiar with the trend of the downshifting of costs to the local property tax and to local budgets. And that's the place where you don't want to put them in the position during this pandemic of making the tough choices of either having to raise taxes or cut vital services that are so crucial to our communities. So we did pass the HEROES Act, and the centerpiece of that proposal was significant support to states, counties, and municipalities, and to allow that support to be flexible, not only to deal with the response efforts and costs from coronavirus, but also the lost revenue that they're experiencing. New Hampshire is already seeing this in terms of its state budget, where revenues are drying up. Think of our business taxes, our rooms and meals taxes, even the property taxes and individuals that might not be able to pay their property tax. So that's going to hurt our budgets across the board. And so we do need some significant support. I led a letter that I wrote with Annie Custer, and we had every mayor, every county commission, and lots of local officials sign it, asking Congress to provide support for municipalities and to ensure that that can be flexible for the lost revenue that they're experiencing. So we're hoping that finds a voice in the Senate in particular. I know we haven't heard encouraging news yet on this front, but clearly we don't want to put our communities in a place where they have to think about cutting law enforcement, education, public health, the things that make our communities strong and are so important right now to people as we move through this pandemic.
I agree. New Hampshire is experiencing its lowest inventory of housing in history. And I will say that again for the folks out back. New Hampshire is experiencing its lowest inventory of housing in history. I'm feeling it. All agents are feeling it. Buyers are feeling it. Sellers are feeling it. It's very noticeable. I work with people all the time who want to stay in New Hampshire, but they just cannot find adequate and affordable housing. We recognize many of these issues are local, but is there anything on the federal level that could be done to expand housing opportunities here in New Hampshire?
Yes, and we're actually considering a bill today that is talking about infrastructure improvements and what we can do to create the backbone of economic success. And when we think of infrastructure, sometimes we just think of roads and bridges, but this bill also includes provisions beyond the transportation space. So we're talking about high-speed broadband access, water infrastructure improvements that have long been waylaid in our communities, as well as housing infrastructure. And so I'm hopeful this bill passes. It's got $100 billion, of support nationwide to deal with the affordable housing crisis. But you're right, this is an issue that isn't just going to take funding, it's also going to take action at the state and local level, particularly with those local regulations that sometimes prohibit projects of a certain density from being completed. So, we kind of need a whole of government approach here to this problem. And I think that we're hoping in this infrastructure package, we can not only put people back to work, but help create a framework for success in transportation, in housing, and in so many other areas that need some investment.
Yeah, and I certainly agree. I met with you a couple of years ago and spoke about infrastructure when I came down to your office, and even myself, I wasn't even aware of considering internet being a basic utility that not everybody has access to. And I think we've all really learned through this pandemic when homeschooling and just the huge difference in terms of whether or not if you had good internet access, you were able to keep your kid being educated versus people who didn't have access to that internet. And I do agree. I think it's more important than ever. So I applaud and appreciate your work on that. For sure.
Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to operate your business, to operate your real estate office if you don't have access to broadband. And there's a digital divide that exists based on geography, a lot of rural communities that are underserved, a lot of socioeconomic groups that are underserved in New Hampshire. And as education, government services, healthcare continues to go online, and I think that'll stick with us beyond this pandemic, access to broadband is so crucial for the 21st century. So there's some significant support here. Also some great efforts underway at the state and regional level to deploy broadband. And so this is going to be a hot issue moving forward. And I think it's one that clearly bridges the political divide. It's about a necessity for our economy.
It seems to affect every state. Am I right on that? Like, would everybody agree in terms of the impact that it has? And
absolutely. The president has talked a lot about this issue. In the House, our effort is led by Jim Clyburn, who represents a rural district in South Carolina. So you'd be hard pressed to find a state where there aren't access issues. New Hampshire recently became a part of a federal mapping effort that's going to help us identify where those gaps exist. And so, understanding the scope and challenges of the problem is important to be able to fully address them. But there is great, support at the state level in New Hampshire. I've worked with folks in Carroll County, and there's a Carroll County Broadband Committee that's been working on filling in the gaps. And that's clearly a challenge there, but it's so important for our communities, for healthcare, for education, so many other things moving forward.
Awesome. Lastly, this year has seen an appropriate and long overdue re-examination of the impact that discrimination has on our society. Unfortunately, real estate has played a role in that discrimination and on the housing disparity which exists today. The Fair Housing Act has gone a long way to fixing that problem, but we know there's still work left to be done. What are your thoughts on what needs to come next to ensure equality and opportunity for everyone, regardless of skin color or sexual orientation?
Well, thanks for raising this issue. And I think this gets to who we are. And, I'm proud to represent New Hampshire, which is a live and let live state that I think, looks for ways to bring people together and create an inclusive environment. And certainly we see that happen. We see good conversations happening between those who are protesting racial injustice and, say, our law enforcement community that is receptive to those conversations. More of that needs to continue. We can't place all the inequality on the policing conversation, even though we have an impetus to respond there, and we've already passed legislation in the House on that. But we've got to talk about economic inequalities that exist, and so many of the legacies that we inherit. The legacy of redlining and of Jim Crow, and that still has an influence over the fortunes and opportunities of individuals today. Someone may have a totally different experience than me if the color of their skin is different in our state, and we've got to have those conversations even when they're uncomfortable and find ways to move forward together. So I think this is an issue about racial and economic justice. And I think we're well positioned in New Hampshire to be respectful and to look for ways to make sure no one is left behind. And I hope we can do that in a way that puts our best foot forward. So, it is a concerning time. We're going through a pandemic, an economic crisis. We're seeing mass protests. And I think these issues all intersect in certain ways. COVID is impacting communities of color a lot worse than maybe other groups. And so we have to fully understand that and make sure that folks have what they need to succeed and are on an even footing in this country moving forward. And I hope that regardless of what twists and turns lie ahead, that we all recognize we're all in this together. We're one community, one state, one country. Someone having access to healthcare is important for all of us. Someone's economic fortunes are important to all of us. Whether or not someone experiences, justice at the hands of law enforcement is important to us. So I think we need to think about these issues, how they all intersect, and what can be done. We're one big extended family, and we should be treating each other like that.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Congressman. Well, that is all I have for you today. If you ever have anything you need from us as an association, or you need some insight onto what we're hearing about, whether it be housing or in general, just know we are always here for you. We really appreciate you representing us. You do a great job. And I really want to thank you for your time today to have this conversation on these super important topics.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And I always appreciate the accessibility of realtors in New Hampshire. Usually I see a big group of you coming down to my office in Washington in the spring. Obviously that's not possible right now, but I look forward to staying in touch. And if anyone has any issues they'd like to call us about, our number is 285-4300. Please reach out to our office, and we're happy to chat about anything or hear concerns about any of the issues out there. But I hope everyone stays safe and appreciate the conversation today.